perceiving is a way of speaking. It's a kind of allegory. Our mind do not allow us to verbalize beside subject and object relationship between perceived and perceiver. So perception is a way of speaking. Actually, there is no such a thing as perception. It is a representation. There is no such a thing as perception as something perceived and a perceiver, which are both, way of thinking. So when the perception takes place, the accent is on the object perceived, and if you let an object perceive unfold, it reduces into stillness. When there is no object to be perceived, the subject cannot maintain. Subject and object come and die at the same time in oneness. So when the object has dissolved, the subject has dissolved. If there is no object, no subject, the word perception is a romantic word, but it's supposed to describe this evidence that there is no such a thing as perception. So it's like the word immobility. It means nothing. There's no such a thing as immobility. But the word has some functional value, or the word perception. There's no such a thing.
So what language should I learn to understand non-duality? As our Western languages don't have the words to express.
But the Eastern languages are not better. Yes, they are slightly more elaborated. But whatever you learn, Sanskrit, Arabic, or Chinese, still, sooner or later, you must give up the words. So words are just a finger pointing to something. You cannot understand with words. So understanding in a traditional term is being understanding. But there is nothing understood and nobody understanding. So this oneness cannot be comprehended by words. So in any case, words have to be given up. Not as such, but as covering the field we're talking about. But as a poet, you can use words to point to where there's something that cannot be expressed. As an architect, as a musician, as a dancer, you can point to the space, but you cannot reveal it with perception. So words are a little value. That's why you can enjoy reading Mr. Eckhart, or reading Ibn Arabi, or reading Abhinavagupta the same way. The words are different, but they don't speak about words, they speak about silence. Silence is one. So all words, in a certain way, can stimulate the fulfilling of silence as long. We don't think that the word will reveal the silence. Other way, it's a kind of fantasy.
Written, the thinker is the thought. I actually firstly have read the thinker is a thought, but it's written the thinker is the thought. if we see that the thinker is nothing but a thought, from your perspective, is there a thinker, or what is it that brings thoughts with any content into play?
Why is a beautiful word, but it has no meaning in traditional science because it presupposes the existence of what you ask why for. So words are pointers. So when we speak about thoughts, it's a word we've used, but these words do not comprehend what it points, like when we use the word perception. Perception is a beautiful word, but what it could actually mean is much beyond the word. So in the Kashmiri Sheva perspective, thinking is not an activity. It is something we agree on, that the thoughts come. So instead of why, for us the question is more to experience this movement. And in becoming aware of this movement, the word thoughts and the word perception will disappear because we realize that what we call thoughts are in fact perceived, so they are perception, and that what we call perception actually is a thought, because the fact of being aware is thinking. So perception and thoughts are actually the same thing. Just when you apprehend it in a conceptual way, you call it a thought. When you apprehend it in a perceptual way, you call it perception. But it is not two. It's like when we talk about the body and the mind. It's both. We use both expressions to talk about the same thing. But if we accent it in a perceptual way, we call it the body. If we want to approach it in a more conceptual way, we call it thinking. But there is no body and thinking, and there is no perception and thoughts. There's just representation. So the why they come, it's a deep question, but the tradition doesn't hold the answer because it doesn't live with this question. The intensity of thoughts or perception make you giving away the questioning. That means when you look at the moon, the intensity of the moon removes the question how and why and so on. So we will say, traditionally speaking, in the intensity of the moment, the question why can never occur. And it's only intensity, not only when I look at the moon. So when you see that life is moment to moment, always in intensity, this intensity makes you give away the thinking, makes you give away the questioning. The answer is intensity. And it concludes in a certain way all thinking. Thinking comes when the intensity is reduced. When you make love with your wife or with your girlfriend or boyfriend, whatever, if you begin to think, it means the intensity has gone. When you do martial art, when you begin to think, first it's very dangerous, and then it means the intensity is gone. But when you realize the intensity is moment to moment, the space for thinking is very reduced. Thinking comes as an expression, if you're a poet or whatever, but never as an explication. So I cannot answer your question because for me there is no question. In France, we have a poet, one of the early poets, Ronsard, who said, La rose est sans pourquoi. Roses is without why. And I think he conveys the same thing, that the beauty or the intensity, which is the same word, must reveal itself directly, without the thinking. So in a certain way, the why take you away of the intensity. At least in the tantric tradition, we see it that way.
Is it the same thing with feeling and the feeler? Or is that some other concept?
Yes, it is. We are not very creative. We always represent the word in the same way, in perceived and perceiver, in feeling and feeler. We have no role to play. There is no doer, there is no thinker, there is no feeler. So the pretension is an appropriation. In action, there is only action. There is no actor. So to say that I feel, in a way, stop the feeling. When you said I feel, you don't feel, you think. So you have stopped the experience. Like if you said I perceive, but you're not perceiving, you're thinking. So the representation of feeler and what is felt is a way to expressing it as a pedagogical way to reason, but it means nothing. It's exactly as if you put your hand on the knees of your wife and you ask yourself, am I feeling her knees or am I feeling my hand? You can spend your life deepening the questioning. And according to your sensitivity, sometimes you say, no, I feel my hand, of course. Then you say, no, I feel her knees. Up to you come to the abrupt evidence that actually you don't feel her knees and you don't feel your hand, because there is no such a thing. There is perception, which we said previously there was none. And if you dog, ask yourself, well, what did you perceive? According to the intelligence of the dog, you will say, well, of course, I feel her knees. If the dog is a little wiser, you said to your dog, no, I feel my hand, of course. But to feel your hand or to feel the knees is only good for the dog. But if you're not a dog, we'll realize that there is perception, there is oneness, and to describe this oneness in relative terms, you have to invent knees and a hand for the poor dog, so he doesn't get crazy. But it is only for the dog. There is no such a thing. There's never been a hand nor a knees. That's a representation. This pure perception, which after we name it according to the surrounding, to the circumstance. In that way, there's never been anything that could be felt nor a feeler. There is a way to say something, like when you said the sunrise in the morning is beautiful expression. It means nothing. But between you and I, we use this expression to convey something. So if you said, I feel the need of my wife, or I feel my hand, it is like saying it is raining. It doesn't mean somebody is raining, but it is raining. There is a feeling. There's nobody to feel anything. The representation. That's, in this perspective, life is immense. There are many other traditions who are contradicting this approach, of course. They all are right, of course.
Was there once a time when you didn't experience reality in this way? And what changed?
The world seems to make things personal. Nobody is knowing, nobody is reigning, and nobody is experiencing anything. It's the way of speaking. It can never be appropriated. That's why the Christian tradition, the Islamic tradition, has shown a greater intelligence in expression. Because in Christianity, when Mr. Eckhart finished Blessed are the Poor, Beatus Pauperes, and when he said, let us pray God that we come to understand what was just expressed, he put himself in position of openness, not of knowing anything. In Christianity, nobody can become Jesus. That's good enough. In the Islamic tradition, when Ibn Arabi describes the travel he just had in all the different levels of reality, where he met all the envoy of God, and when he described clearly the fact that he's traveling in the highest sphere of consciousness, didn't bring him closer to God, because he's nowhere that God cannot be, but that he just traveled in the sign of God. He finished his description saying, and I look in myself, and I could find not in myself the slightest trace of divinity. That's the beauty of Islamic tradition. But unfortunately, the Indian tradition and the Buddhist tradition, for some poetical reason, have seemed to have described an appropriation. And when somebody who do not know Indian tradition read Atma Bodha or Shankaracharya and read Shivoham, I am Shiva, some people, it get to their head. And they may think they are Shiva. But if you read it in traditional way, when you read Shivoham, I am Shiva, you read, when I stop pretending when I am not, what remains is consciousness. And there is nothing ever, anything personal there. And that's why there is Shankara, or Ramdas, or Abhinavagupta. It is not their name, because it is not personal. Shankara is not a personal name. There's never been a Mr. Shankara. It means what gives peace. Abhinavagupta was never his name, and Ramdas neither. So in Indian tradition, there's no person, but because of the wrong understanding of the text, in Indian tradition and in the Buddhist tradition, sometimes it seems it has become personal. That somebody become the Buddha. Or nobody can become the Buddha. When you stop pretending to be anything but remain, is a Buddha. So there can never be any room for appropriation, at least in the Kashmir tradition. It is the poetical way who made it express in a way that badly understood, you can take it personally. But there's no such a thing. But the Christian and the Islamic have been much more clear in this expression. No Christian will ever pretend to be Jesus. And that's good enough. So there's no room to become anything. That's the roots of really the Kashmiri Shaiva tradition.
I think you partly answered the question that I had, but it had to do with the intensity you referred to, that when it's absent, thought comes in. You said that intensity was beauty also. I think you said that. My question was about grace. Would you say that grace is something referred to in the tradition, and that it could also be referred to as this beauty, as intensity?
Grace, beauty, intensity. It is very important of not trying to understand what cannot be understood with words. So when you said the word grace, and when I said the word grace, you and I, we cannot know what we mean each other. According to your culture, your understanding, your meaning is mine is different. So we're going to agree on the words. Yes, it is grace. Oh, no, it is not grace. What have we done? Nothing. So when you read some sacred text, sometimes you see the word grace and there's a wholeness of meaning. Sometimes you will read the word intensity. Sometimes you will read the word silence. In a way, who cares? It is for you to see that the word silence is a word, but it points to something. It is for you to see that the word grace is a word, but it points to something. So we must dive in this feeling. Then how we express this feeling to our dogs depends on the dog. But the expression covers more reality than it uncovers it. So we have to be very careful that the expression do not limit what is unlimited. That's the beauty of traditional text, in where all words have come out of silence. That when you read Mr. Eckhart, there is so little space for himself as a person that all words really come from pure stillness. And so when you read the text, it reads you in a way. When you finish the text, you finish with the text. What remains the feeling. So the word grace is a beautiful word, but if it's taken in the right way, not as something personal, not as something that could happen to you, to me, because that is fantasy. Grace is not personal. Grace is the stopping of pretending being something. It doesn't happen. To pretend happen. But grace is the home ground of this happening. So all the world point to this kind of home ground. So I think it's important not to try to define the word and to find the right word, because the right word is not a word. That's why, in a way, one should never compare sacred tradition. When you read Ramana Maharshi or when you read Abhinavagupta, you should not compare words, because you can only compare words. When you read Abhinavagupta, you read, and at the end of the text, you give yourself to the feeling. That's a direct answer of the text, in a way. If you read Ramana Maharshi, when you finish the question and answer, again you taken back to your own lack of question and answer. But if you compare it with Mr. Eckhart or with Abhinavagupta, you're gonna compare words. Then it has maybe some value in philosophy or in literature. But in what we speak here, it has no value. So words should be understood in their own line, and only in relation to other words of the same line they can be reduced as stillness. In relation with another tradition, they will remain as words of difference.
Hello. Would you speak about values of practices or lack of value as you proceed in the practices of meditation practices or others that can culture the nervous system so that we become accustomed to the space of silence?
It is a beautiful point of view, but who doesn't relate to the approach we express here. For us, there's no practice. There's expression. That means when you realize that there's nothing to achieve in life, you have a lot of time, because you don't need to love or to be loved. You don't need to anything. So all the time which most people spend to be loved, to be respected, to be wealthy, to be healthy, to whatever, is free. So in this immense free time will come to you, you express this free time. It is according to your own capacity. So if you dance, you're a dancer. Or if you can paint, you'll be a painter. If you know to do yoga, you do yoga. But it is not because you paint or because you do yoga or because you meditate that this has any effect on you. It is because you have felt that you're not an object, that your freedom from the fantasy of having to become something gives you an immense space for expressing it in the way according to your own abilities. So art, all the ritual art come into place at that moment. You can express it with the art of street fighting, you can express it with the art of building a temple, you can express it with as a doctor, you can express it, but it's an expression. Yoga in the Kashmir tradition is not a practice will lead to understanding. It is the opposite. It is understanding which may unfold in the form of yoga, if it is your resonance. But yoga brings nothing. You were never supposed to, actually. It is an expression. If you were born in Indian tradition, and this feeling occurs to you, a king remains a king, a prostitute, and a yogi. You don't change your qualification, but your openness unfolds in the way you express yourself, of course. So yoga for us is nothing. It could be an expression of this feeling, but as playing violin, no more. And meditation is the kind of feeling of the deep sleep. So when you entertain going directly from the waking state to the deep sleep, because there's no need to dream, because you don't postpone anything anymore, this intensity of the deep sleep may eventually call you in waking time. And then there are moments where you can say it's a deep sleep or meditation, but it comes on you or not. But it is not a practice, it is a prolongation.
I suggest we just have one more question before we finish.
Can you speak to us of touch?
Perceiving, touching, feeling is all, again, some expression of the same experience. But generally, to answer it in different way, generally touching comes from the mind. You touch, there is an intention. Either there is going forward or going against it. You like it or you dislike it. There is a third way, which is to not create anything with the experience of touch or experience of feeling or experience of perception. That means you remain in openness. Whatever you touch your cat, you touch your neighbor, you touch the space, or you feel your hand, all this is touch. You can let this touch become alive. For the touch to become alive, you must be silent. Silent of intention, silent of defense. So you must refer to your natural state. In this natural state, perception appears, expands, and disappears. Touch as any other perception. So it's only touch, whether it is physical or you need to be close to something to touch it. Everything is always here. So you give yourself to the touch in a very cold way, in a very warm way, in an intense way. Cold of affectivity, warm of intensity. And one could say it's enough. It's just for once we touch without touching, without defending. We perceive without perceiving. Clarity unravel. It is as simple as that. But generally we don't, because we don't touch, we want something. We don't touch, we think something. We anticipate something. That's why all traditional ritual bring the accent into the feeling, into the touching. Whatever it is a tea ceremony in Japan, whatever it is yoga, whatever it is doing a pot, whatever it is doing martial art, you will all be forced to come back to feeling, touching, and realizing the non-separation. When you do a pot, there's no you and the pot and the clay and the what turn. There's oneness. Otherwise, the pot spread into the ceiling. If you do martial art, it is the same thing. If you do yoga, it is the same thing. There's oneness. In yoga, you don't go from one part to another. No, you're in oneness. There's no direction in yoga. There's only immobility. This immobility is conveyed as movement, but it is felt as immobility. And the immobility in yoga is movement, is vibration. So both become one. So touch is the same thing. Touch without the thinking is pure consciousness. And there is only that. But even when the thinking comes, it is still consciousness. But we don't experience it that way. Up to the moment you realize that thinking is feeling, is touching. You feel your thoughts, you feel when you're agitated, and then you realize that thinking, touching is consciousness. But if we have no more time, thank you for coming.